We now move to session 2, for which the moderator is Dr. B.K. Saxena, and the two speakers are Commander Amir Basha of the Indian Navy and Ms. Sonali Banerjee. Dr. Saxena has more than 5 decades of experience in shipping. He was a past principal of Tolani Maritime Institute, Pune, for about 20 years before retiring in 2018, and is presently their advisor. He was also the past president of the Institute of Marine Engineers India, the chairman of the Narottam Moraji Institute of Shipping, and the Research and Training Committee of the Indian National Shipowners Association. He has won several awards, including Outstanding Contribution to Maritime Education and Training by the Government of India, as well as Lifetime Achievement Awards by the Institute of Marine Engineers India and the Foreign Owners and Ship Managers Association. May I request Dr. Saxena to take the stage.
Thank you, Admiral Nadkarni. I hope I'm audible, and greetings everybody, and so nice to be back on the IMF platform. It gave me an opportunity to take out the IMF tie and wear it, which I haven't used it for. I haven't used it for almost 2 years now. So thank you for this opportunity. Excellent speakers so far. So, and I'm sure we will continue the trend in this session as well as in the next. Yeah. Okay. You see, the main theme of today's program is marine propulsion. You see, and obviously, what do we expect from a propulsion unit? Obviously, to take from point A to point B, but it is much more than that. Our expectations from the propulsion units keep on changing depending on the environment, depending on the requirements. Obviously, we need reliability, no doubt about it. Ease of maintenance, definitely. The compliance with the regulatory requirements, which is constantly increasing. Okay. The size, which of course in Indian Navy, definitely size is a big issue, but even in merchant marine today, those days of having only an inline engine, you lose a lot of space. You have a too tall engine, you lose space. So size is an important thing. Availability of the fuel is important. And eventually the cost optimization is a very critical part. Okay. Keeping all this in mind, the technology also keeps on changing and upgrading. Okay. And the speakers so far have referred to it, and the two main speakers here in our session will also touch on that. But by what Admiral Rao said, I'm reminded of my first ship, which was a 1952 built freighter, which had all auxiliaries of steam, including the steering, but the main engine was huge B&W 4-stroke engine, big one, where the piston used to come out from the crankcase. Okay. And the 4 main pumps, the freshwater pump, the seawater pump, the lube oil pump, and the booster pump were all main engine connected. Okay. And we were having a voyage from Japan to Vancouver, and our auxiliary engine conked off. For 2 days, the engine was working without the ship being no lights. We were having Petromexes and the Lultins, and the ship was going, and we managed to berth in Midway Islands in Pacific, which was a very strong US base. I'm talking of mid-60s and late 60s. And then it was repaired. It was really a sight. Many years later, when I was a student in Malmö in Sweden, I visited the B&W museum in Copenhagen, and that kind of engine model is there. So if any of you travel there, please do see that kind of engine, which is historical actually. So just Admiral Rao reference to the no lights gave me okay. So coming back to the talk, the first speaker we have today is Commander Basha, Amir Basha. He is ex-NDA and specialized thereafter in marine engineering, and he's got a postgraduate diploma in marine engineering from INS Shivaji, and MTech in mathematical modeling and simulation from DIIT Pune. He is presently working in the Center of Excellence in Marine Engineering in INS Shivaji Lonavala, and he's the head of the faculty in Systems and Engineering, and teaching complicated subjects like IC engines and gas turbines. So welcome to Commander Basha, and you have the time which is of course given by the organizers, but see if somehow we can shorten the thing, and especially those points which have already been covered by the other speakers. That's for you also, and also for the next speaker, Sonali, that if something has already been covered, maybe you can, unless you have something very strongly on that to say, please do that. Okay. All right. So please go ahead. Yes. All yours.
Good morning, sir. Request permission to start.
Yeah, please.
Over the next 15 minutes, I'll be giving a brief presentation on propulsion systems used in warships, namely steam, diesel, and gas turbine. The scope of the presentation is as shown on the screen. After giving brief introduction on the subject, overview and history of steam, diesel, and gas turbine propulsion in the Indian Navy will be covered prior concluding the presentation. With every height scaled in the progress of technology, man has always thirsted for more. The Indian Navy too has witnessed a phenomenal growth in marine engineering technology over the years, from reciprocating steam engines of 1947 to the diesel engines and gas turbines of today. Needless to say, it has been an eventful journey for the band of marine engineers, a saga of growth and success which has empowered the Indian Navy to share stage with the best in the world. Being a peninsular country, India has always had immense interest in the seas, and our maritime traditions span over 4,000 years. Indians have engaged in seaborne trade and cultural exchanges for many centuries. However, when the European interest in our subcontinent began in the 14th century, Indian maritime prowess suffered debilitating setbacks. The beginning of 18th century saw the emergence of Kanoji Angre, admiral of Chhatrapati Shivaji's Maratha fleet, whose name became a legend and whose exploits are written in the letters of gold in the annals of naval history. Shivaji was a firm believer in the doctrine, Jalaim Jasya Valaim Tasya, he who rules the seas is all powerful, which Kanoji Angre put to practice. Shipbuilding shifted from Surat to Bombay in early 1700s. Loji Nasavanji Wadia, ancestor of a long line of famous Parsi master builders of both naval and commercial ships, selected the site for naval dockyard in Bombay. This naval dockyard, during the course of next 100 years, proceeded to build more than 115 war vessels. The Indian Navy evolved as a war-fighting service from the time the British arrived in India. After 3 centuries of fluctuating fortunes and several changes in nomenclature and roles, the Indian Navy metamorphosed into a composite unit in the mid-1950s. Since independence, the Indian Navy has operated a multitude of vessels and employed a wide range of engines, propulsion, and other systems. The present-day Indian Navy is a world-class potent naval force in comparison with the diminutive force of ships available in 1947. And marine engineers have made valuable and significant contribution in this growth to a powerful naval force. Marine engineers are involved in the operation of main propulsion plants, power generation, and mechanization aspects of the ship functions, such as steering, petroleum, oil, and lubrication handling, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and other associated systems. Marine engineering is the discipline of applying engineering sciences, namely mechanical, electrical, electronics, and computer science, to the development, design, and maintenance of warcraft propulsion, power generation, ship-based systems, and associated onboard controls. Marine steam propulsion. Marine engineering technology that the Indian Navy inherited at the time of our independence was undoubtedly representative of the technology of those times, that is steam propulsion. In the context of ship propulsion, the end of the 19th century had heralded the initiation of reciprocating engine technology, which was borrowed from the railways. Steam engines are external combustion engines that perform mechanical work using steam as a working fluid and work on the Rankine cycle. Although the steam power was not used until the 17th century, scientists had understood its potential for hundreds of years. The elopile, invented by the Greek, used water vapor for motion as early as the 1st century AD. While there was no practical benefit of this device, it was the first example of experiments with steam power. Greater developments took place with the invention of the first steam boiler in the 17th century. Although it was nothing more than a pressure cooker or a tea kettle, a series of key inventions followed one after another later from this point. In a short span of time, steam power was extensively used in railway locomotives, which led on to the usage for propulsion of ships, propelling them further and faster. Steam powers two types of engines, reciprocating and rotary turbine. The shaft power from each can be directly connected to the propeller or through some form of transmission through a gearbox. Reciprocating steam engines use the force produced by steam pressure to push a piston back and forth inside a cylinder. This pushing force can be transformed by a connecting rod and flywheel into rotational force for work. Reciprocating piston type steam engines were the dominant source of power for all auxiliary machinery on board warships. A steam turbine is a rotary machine that extracts thermal energy from pressurized steam and uses it for mechanical work. It is a form of heat engine that derives much of its increased thermodynamic efficiency by using multi-stages consisting of blades attached radially to a spinning shaft for expansion of the steam. On steam-propelled Indian naval warships, steam turbines are the dominant source of power for main propulsion and power generation through turbo alternators. The very first ship that was received from the United Kingdom was the Leander-class light cruiser of the Royal Navy, ex-HMNZS Achilles, commissioned as HMIS Delhi in July 1948, which was powered from the steam generated in 4 Admiralty 3-drum boilers. On 26 Jan 1950, with India becoming a republic, the Royal Indian Navy was renamed the Indian Navy, and the steam-propelled acquisitions included ex-Godavari, Gomti, Ganga, Khukri, Kirpan, Kutar, Trishul, Talwar, and Mysore. The high point of the Navy was in 1961. The Royal Indian Navy was with the commissioning of aircraft carrier INS Vikrant, which catapulted the Indian Navy into a completely different league. This mammoth warship was equipped with 4 standard Admiralty 3-drum boilers. As part of indigenous warship construction from 1970s to 2000, the steam propulsion plant was the mainstay of Indian Navy. Ships of the Nilgiri class, built at the Mazgaon docks from 1970s to 80s, were equipped with Y160 steam propulsion plants, consisting of 2 Babcock-Wilcox 2-drum integral short furnace boilers. This propulsion plant design was continued on Godavari and Brahmaputra classes of ships. Y160 steam propulsion plants marked the beginning of indigenization and self-reliance, wherein the Boiler Erection Fabrication Center at Naval Dockyard, Bombay, developed the capability of erecting these boilers for main propulsion in-house. The Indian Navy acquired its second aircraft carrier, INS Virat, ex-HMS Hermes, from the Royal Navy, and after an extensive refit, commissioned it in 1987. Standard Admiralty 3-drum boilers propelled this 23,900-ton warship, which served the nation till 2017. Steam-propelled Indian naval ships of today include the aircraft carrier Vikramaditya, landing platform dog Jalashwa, and frigates of Godavari and Brahmaputra class. INS Vikramaditya is powered by 8 new generation Russian boilers, which produce a total power of 180,000 HP, driving 4 huge propellers. Each boiler generates 100 TPH of steam at a very high pressure of 64 bar against 30 bar in other existing steamships, including Godavari, Brahmaputra classes, and INS Jalashwa, fitted with indigenous and Western origin boilers respectively. Indian Navy has thus developed expertise in operating indigenous, Russian, and Western origin boilers and would continue to operate them for at least next 30 years. Diesel propulsion. The prime consideration for shifting to diesel propulsion was the reduced size of the diesel engine, which resulted in an optimum power to weight ratio. The diesel engine is a compression ignition engine and has the highest thermal efficiency amongst any practical internal or external combustion engine due to its very high compression ratio. Diesel engines may be designed as either two-stroke or four-stroke engines. They were originally used as a more efficient replacement for stationary steam engines. Since the 1910s, they have been used in submarines and ships. This marine propulsion technology coexisted with the steam technology that the Indian Navy inherited at the time of our independence. Diesel-propelled acquisitions of Republic India included light tanker ship ex-Shakti, inshore minesweepers ex-Baseen and Bimli Patnam, coastal minesweepers ex-Karwar, Kannur, Pedalur, and Kakinada, anti-aircraft frigates ex-Brahmaputra, Bias, and Betwa, and seaward defense boats ex-Subhadra, Suvarna, and Sukanya. The need for more power in less weight and space was always the main thrust of any propulsion package design. As a result, lightweight aluminum alloy radial engines of sophisticated and complex design used in aviation industry were marinized by the Russians and adapted for OSA class fast attack missile boats. These ships acquired by the Indian Navy became legendary when they were deployed with strategic brilliance to strike a lethal blow to the enemy's harbor in the 1971 war. These compact aeroderivative high-speed engines called for specialized operator expertise and maintenance ability. Missile Boat Engine Repair Center of Naval Dockyard, Bombay, and the original equipment manufacturers jointly worked to make the operations more user-friendly. As a result, the radial engines became a major success story in the Navy. Addition of new generation diesel engines to the Indian naval fleet happened with the acquisition of 5 Petya class of ships in 1968. The ships were fitted with unique Russian two-stroke opposed piston diesel engines. They worked on a two-stroke cycle and had 4 crankshafts. Following Petyas, Durg class of diesel propelled ships were acquired commencing 1976 with primary intention of coastal patrol and defense. In the 80s, when the Indian Navy was growing, the demand for more and more platforms to meet diverse operational requirements also grew. Diesel engines of different make and various designs found their way into the Navy during this period. The Peelstick PA series of diesels taken up by Kirloskar Oil Engines Limited for indigenous production were selected for the corvettes of Indian Navy and represented a simple yet modern design. The high-speed MTU engines, on the other hand, with a compact and lightweight design, have always remained favorite for small crafts. The large size, slow-speed MAN design diesels of the fleet tankers were a merchant marine type of engine introduced into the Navy for the first time. Nearly all the major engine manufacturers of the world, including Columna, Paxman, MTU, Peelstick, MAN, Cummins, and Coyle, have an association with the Indian Navy. Such vast expertise in operating marine diesels is a creditable achievement for the Indian Naval's marine engineer. Diesel propelled ships in active service today in the Indian Navy include offshore patrol vessels, Kukri and Kora class corvettes, Kamorta class ASW vessels, fleet tankers, and landing ship tanks. Gas turbine propulsion. A gas turbine, also called a combustion turbine, is a type of continuous and internal combustion engine. The main elements common to all gas turbine engines are an upstream rotating gas compressor, a combustor, also known as combustion chamber, and a downstream turbine on the same shaft as the compressor. The basic operation of the gas turbine follows the Brayton cycle with air as the working fluid. Atmospheric air flows through the compressor that brings it to a higher pressure. Energy is then added by spraying fuel into it and igniting it so that the combustion generates a high temperature flow. This high temperature pressurized flow is repurposed for external work, such as rotating a second independent turbine known as a power turbine that is connected to a propeller. Fitted on board the erstwhile Kamortas, the gas turbine, a radically new propulsion concept for the Indian Navy, was introduced in the 60s. The two M2 bay gas turbines, one each on the outer shafts, gave the ship awesome boost and propulsive power. The induction of GTs received renewed thrust with the arrival of M3E Russian GTs on board Rajput class of ships in the 1980s. M3 GTs were rugged and reliable engineering equipment. In 1987, the Veer class of ships 1241 REs were inducted using M15E Russian propulsion systems. This GT was reversible, and the unique layout showed how a GT could be adapted in a confined space of a small vessel. The idea of creating an in-house composite and self-contained marine gas turbine overhaul facility manned entirely by the service personnel to cater for gas turbines and gas turbine generators and future acquisitions was conceived in the early 80s. The first overall gas turbine, M3E, rolled out of the portals of this unique facility in August 1995 and was installed on board INS Ranveer. The first indigenously overhauled gas turbine generator prime mover underwent successful testbed trials in December 1996. This establishment, which was commissioned as Indian naval ship Excella on 26 August 2000, today has a cumulative experience of overhauling more than 66 gas turbines and gas turbine generators. Another remarkable achievement during the 90s was the indigenously designed and built state-of-the-art destroyers, the Delhi class of ships, which were constructed at Mazgaon Dock Limited and were the first gas turbine propelled ships designed by the Indian Navy. A remarkable technology assimilation that has taken place in the Indian Navy in a reasonably short span of one generation of marine engineer officers has been in the gas turbine field. The expertise and the confidence in maintenance and operation of gas turbines today in Indian Navy is at par with the most advanced navies. Today, the GT are the front runner of main propulsion and power generation on major Indian naval ships. Although certain important gas turbine technology areas such as blade design, gas flow path, matching of spool, etc. are yet to be mastered in India, and indigenous industrial support in this area of technology is minimal, a commendable task has been performed by the Navy to build up its own expertise on maintenance and operation.
Commander Bashak, if you could expedite, please.
Yes. The Project 17 frigates, the Indian Navy's Shivali class. These ships have a combined diesel or gas turbine propulsion plant featuring two HAL 2500 marine gas turbines and two Kirloskar peel stick diesel engines. Construction of the new indigenous aircraft carrier has been completed and the ship is under trials at Cochin Shipyard Limited. This vessel is powered by four HAL LM 2500 gas turbines driving two shafts. It is a remarkable platform and an extremely challenging experience for the next generation of marine engineer officers of the Indian Navy. The technological journey for the marine engineers effectively started from the first cruiser HMS Delhi, a battle-worn ship handed on from the Royal Navy. The road traveled by the marine engineers from the pre-war machineries to today's state-of-the-art ship has not been an easy one. Technologies that the marine engineers encountered over the years have been diverse in type and source. The diversity has also truly been in extremes. Managing such diversity, especially in the absence of any active support from the Indian industry, has posed immense challenges. It is to the credit of the Indian Navy's marine engineers that with imagination, ingenuity, instinct, and improvisation, service and availability of the equipment and systems were consistently ensured. We can say with pride that barring the rarest of rare occasions, the main engines have always been ready for sea. With this, I'm finished with my presentation, sir. The house is now open for discussion.
Thank you very much, Commander Basha. An excellent presentation, and I mean, it's so very enlightening, especially for the people who are from the merchant marine here. It is so nice to see, you know, the initiatives taken by the Indian Navy in indigenization and the use of alternate material, those kind of things, you know. So wonderful to see various developments and the variety of propulsion mechanism and systems which are available, and the kind of experience which is provided to the marine engineers in Indian Navy. So compliments to you, Commander Basha, and I don't see any questions. So, and as it is, we are a little behind schedule. So I would straight away request the second speaker to come in, and yeah, if you can, okay. The second speaker is, we are really privileged to have is Sonali Banerjee, the first girl who took admission in the marine engineering way back in the 90s in the alma mater of mine also, where I had graduated many decades back. And she is the first lady Indian marine engineer in the merchant marine, and also she is the first one who got the certificate of competency, and also the highest level of the certificate of competency, that is the chief engineer's certificate. So we are really privileged to have her here. She has sailed in bulk carriers and tankers for many years, and then she had shore appointments in companies like MSC and some other companies, and thereafter presently she's working as a senior surveyor in the Indian Register of Shipping. And she's also a member of Vista and some other organizations, and very active in the forums of the maritime fraternity in India. So a warm welcome to Sonali, and all yours, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, sir, for those kind words and the warm welcome, and a big namaskar to everybody. And I would like to firstly thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to present myself amongst this August gathering. It is indeed my pleasure. And without taking too much of a time on that, I would just be sharing my screen. And since a lot has already been discussed, starting from the evolution, which of course was not something my session dealt with, and the environmental regulations, the recent upcoming concerns that the ripples that the industry is likely to feel with the coming in of EEXI and CII, a lot has already been covered. So I would just like to restrict myself to the present day brief descriptions on that. Of course, the subject matter experts have dealt with it very beautifully. And just to share my screen now. Can somebody tell me if my screen is visible?
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. So I would be discussing about this, and firstly, I would be discussing that what are the criteria that would actually get into the selection of a propulsion system. As we are aware and already has been spoken about, that it is not just about the successful movement of the ship from point A to point B, but there is far more which goes into the selection of the prime mover for a ship, and the kind of propeller, the drive unit that we are going to have. And just to highlight upon them, first being the navigation safety and the technical feasibility that is associated with the choice of that. The reliability, of course, when we make a choice of a marine propulsion system, the prime mover, we understand that there are huge commercials which are at stake, and the reliability with respect to taking the cargo from point A to point B and meeting the environmental regulations are one of the key challenges. Cost effective, that goes without saying, that the economic viability is very important. Then we have the emission regulations and the fitment of purpose. Some vessels would be, for example, if we have to take a dynamic positioning vessel, then the fine tuning with respect to the maneuverability, because a lot of that offshore structures are around, divers are there at the bottom of those structures and working in the offshore. So this fine tuning with respect to the navigability is very important. And those kind of things would basically go into the fitment of purpose when we talk about it. So moving on to the next slide. As we are all aware, floating objects, some would be propelled and some would be non-propelled. So among the propelled ships, we would mostly typically see the big oil tankers, bulk carrier, gas carriers, containers, and other types of cargo ships. And of course, passenger ships, luxury cruise liners. And we also have a category of floating vessels, if I may say, who are non-propelled, which would typically be like barges, pontoons, accommodation barges, which tend to accommodate special personnel who are working at particular sites, say pipeline units or offshore structures, and also engaged in research, oceanography, etc. So the topic today would be primarily discussing about the propelled ships. So the propulsion system would depend on the type of ship and the trade they are engaged in. So they can broadly be classified into these four categories: the conventional big oil tanker, bulk carrier, container ships, and other cargo ships, the LNG ships, the offshore supply vessels and vessels dealing in offshore operations, and the small commercial vessels. Coming to the first one, that the oil tankers, bulk carriers, and container ships, the main criteria for choosing this kind of a propulsion system, that they should be able to carry those huge volumes of cargo ships, propel at a speed of say 12 to 15 knots, and the container ships may go up to 24 knots to 30 knots. A higher power by weight ratio, that is what I mean, the power that is being generated, and the space and the weight that is being carried. Because whatever weight, the heavier the engine gets, you know, that kind of makes up for some volume of cargo that has to be taken off. So accordingly, it is important that you have a higher power by weight ratio, and the number of power strokes per complete cycle. It would mean the choice of say a 4-stroke or a 2-stroke per cycle for these kind of. This is the typical layout of a propulsion system. Of course, Pankaj Mishra sir has gone to great extent to describe them, but very briefly and basic touching upon would be, you have this engine cylinders, you have the flywheel, you have the intermediate shaft and an intermediate bearing, which would couple it to the tail shaft. This being the drive unit. Is not in the schematic layout, but then you will have a chain case and the camshaft, which would be driving the timing gears. And then eventually you have the propeller, which is attached towards the end of this. So the conventional system for huge ships would be a long stroke or a super long stroke, slow speed, 2-stroke marine diesel engine. And most marine diesel engines would be using a reciprocating diesel engine as the prime mover due to their the operational simplicity they have, the robustness, the fuel economy, the ease of maintenance. And the rotating crankshaft can be directly coupled to the propeller with the slow speed engines, or sometimes with the help of a reduction gear, a medium or a high speed engine, and by an alternator in the case of diesel electric propulsion unit. And the intelligent engines have already been covered vastly, so I will not be discussing much upon that. Moving on to the next category of ships, towards the evolution of the LNG ships. So one of the greatest challenges that we understand that was being faced by people operating on LNG ships were the complexity of the cargo boil-off and how to manage that. And this was the grounds on which the evolution of the LNG ships have developed. So boil-off was initially used in boiler, which was in turn used to generate a lot of steam, and the steam would in turn be driving the main propulsion either by a steam engine or say a steam turbine. However, the efficiency for such systems were not very high. And so there was a constant need to keep this kind of a technology evolving. And technology kept evolving, has improved, and they started using ultra superheated steam turbines, which gave a better economy and efficiency. And of course, thereafter came the so-called hero today, that is the dual fuel technologies that we are all discussing and talking about. So a simple schematic layout of how a dual fuel engines on LNG ship would look at. So these are the gensets, and you have the red line depicting the distillate fuel, and of course TFDEs are also being used, which means that heavy oil, distillate oil, and the boil off from the cargo plant. This would be typically be a cargo tank. The boil off gas comes here. There's a compressor, then there's a heater, and with the help of this heater, from this heater, the boil off gas would be injected along with the distillate fuel and would be burnt here. And then we have this genset which would be connecting the power to the main bus bar. Similarly, we also have the same being used in boiler, and which would in turn be driving the turbine, which can be used with the help of a fixed pitch or a controlled pitch. That's what exactly we saw, the dual fuel diesel electric propulsion. So they were fitted with the partial reliquefaction plant, and the generators were capable to operate on dual fuel as well as HFO. And the ones using HFO, distillate fuel, and the boil off gas would be called the DFDE, that is the tri-fuel diesel electric propulsion. The generated power would then be utilized to drive a big synchronous motor, which would be driving generally a CPP, because the speed variation can be, the power requirement can be varied with the help of a petrol pitch propeller, and in some cases, fixed pitch propellers. Thereafter, the MEGI engines of MAN BMW, they combined the main engine to be able to burn fuel as well as a boil off cargo. However, the big constraint that was being faced in this case was that these kind of an engines, they required a high capacity boosters, almost to the extent of a 350 bar pressure to be injected into the engines. This was simplified with another version of XDF Wärtsilä, where they modified the design to burn both fuel and boil off gas. However, they required a lower pressure boil off gas injection. So the industry opinion has been that this is generally getting more popular. Coming next, I would be discussing very briefly about the schematic layout of a diesel electric propulsion system. So these kind of a system we would generally see in offshore vessels and cruise ships. And as I had mentioned earlier, that in offshore, while operating in the offshore structure, the fine tuning is very important because the dynamic position vessel, the ability to hold the position is very critical under various wind and weather conditions. And for the cruise ships, these are a popular choice because they would generally have less noise and vibration associated, and accordingly the comfort of the passengers are a big criteria while making a choice of the kind of propulsion system. So here they would have huge gensets which would be generating big power connected to the main bus bar, and then this bus bar would from this bus bar they would be driving big motors which would be driving the propulsion unit, thruster units, and the thrusters, stern thruster, bow thruster, whatever the combination is required for say, dynamic positioning. Other commercial vessels, they would a lot of combinations are there, but few of them that I've included here is water jet propulsions, which would be used in small high-speed crafts. Directional propellers or Z-pellers, as they are popularly called, this anchor handling tugs or tugs would be using them. In this case, the propeller moves is able to move from one direction to the other, and accordingly the purpose of the rudder is also used, being meted out in this manner. Thruster units for high precision offshore operations, as for example diving support vessels, coming technologies in renewable energy and wind power. So finally, we are eventually aiming for a situation where we may be able to become fuel free and are able to utilize the renewable energy and wind power. Next, we come to the environmental regulations. Primary concerns that we have when we talk of the environmental regulations are the NOx regulations, the SOx, and the carbon emissions and the particulate matters. On my screen, you can see that now the NOx regulations are stated and the various tiers are mentioned. That is the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 compliance that we have today. So these kind of, this would be basically applicable to engines which are more than 130 kilowatts and are installed on ships which are constructed after a particular date. So tier 1 would be after 1st January if the engines are more than 130 kilowatt and installed on ship after 1st January 2000. Then tier 2 would be applicable to ships which are constructed after 1st January 2011. Then coming to tier 3 would be applicable on ships which are in emission controlled areas. Coming next would be sulfur regulations. And we all know that since last year, the sulfur regulations, it has taken the industry by storm. And just a graphical presentation on the Y scale, we have the sulfur percentile, and in the X-axis along, we have the years in which they were entered into force with that percentage of sulfur. So if we go by the worldwide pattern, so initially it was 4.5, which came down in the year 2012. It was reduced in the year 2012 to 3.5%. And then further it was brought down in the year from 1st January 2020, they came down to 0.5%. For vessels which were operating in emission controlled areas, the first reduction from 1.5 to 1 was experienced between 2010 and 11, which was further reduced in the year 2015 to 0.1%. And after that, it has been steady. The EU board, of course, they have been operating at 0.1% since. A lot of vessels in the main fleet of foreign-going vessels, they have been installed with the exhaust gas cleaning system to be able to enable them to burn the conventional high sulfur fuel with the cleaning system. So the EGCS installations would need to comply with the MEPC resolution 259/68. One big concern here was that the wash water stream had to be processed, and it was important that the wash water meets the discharge criteria before being discharged overboard. This criteria is in terms of the acidity, the turbidity, and the nitrates that are involved there. And the generated effluent or the residue has to be stored and discharged to a shore reception facility. And the data retention is required is for a period of at least 18 months. Now we're coming to a topic which is getting very sensitive, and the industry definitely is embracing them because everybody is talking and we want our future generations to live in a pollution-free environment. So IMO, with the greenhouse gas reduction strategy and the levels of ambitions, we will be discussing briefly in this. The first in this, I would be discussing about the carbon intensity of the ship, which was used to decline that greenhouse gas emission. That is the EEDI. The EEDI is applicable for new ships. When we say new ships, means ships which are constructed after 2030. And this kind of an EEDI would be applied to vessels which are after 13, and they would be using the pre-sea trial data performance which was done along with the EEDI certification. And the next, which would be the EEXI. EEXI would be applicable to ships in the pre-EEDI area. So when we talk of pre-EEDI era, a lot of ships would be the type of ships from which the data is not available, and records may be difficult to retrieve. But with the incoming of EEXI, the trial documents that was available to them, and the engine load and sea trial graphs, they would be utilized for evaluation of this. Carbon intensity of international shipping to decline. So already that has been discussed earlier, that to reduce CO2 emission per transport work by at least 40% by the year 2030 and 70% by 2050. So what was stated in the slide, serial number 1 of the previous slide, the MEPC 75 adopted the phase 3 timelines and reduction rates, which was pertaining to the Energy Efficiency Design Index. So that was for the new ships. That was what MEPC 75 discussed. And towards serial number 2 and 3, that is the EEXI. EEXI talks about the technical measures to be able to control the energy efficiency of the vessel, and the operational measures would be brought forth by the CII, which were adopted in MEPC 76. Of course, here they also discussed about the alternative fuels and net zero carbon fuel which kind of produces no greenhouse gas emissions or generate carbon footprint. These would be the short-term measures, that is the EEDI, the SEAM, the EEXI and CII, technical cooperation, of course, goes without saying. Then the midterm measures would be from 2023 to 2030. Now, why we say 2023? Because that is the kind of entry into force that we are looking for EEXI and CII. So that is the estimated date. Of course, a lot of deliberations are still going on. And they would be talking of the low carbon fuels or, practically clean fuels. And the long-term measures would be the sustainability of this fossil-free fuels and new innovation, renewable energy that the industry would be looking at. So just briefly touching upon the EEXI regulation. It is a technical measure of the ship's energy efficiency and is measured in terms of carbon dioxide CO2 gram per ton per nautical mile. This is stated in the MARPOL Annex 6 Regulation 23 and 25 and applies to ships of 400 GT and above engaged on international voyage.
Sonali, if you could conclude.
Sir, I will just try to shorten this. And of course, this is the graph which talks about the higher the dead weight, so the required EEXI reduces. Attained EEDIs, so I will be skipping this because this is more about the implementation plan. In case after preliminary calculation, it is found that the attained EEXI of the vessel is more than the required EEXI, then we will have to present and submit a suitable improvement plan. Proposals have to be given to the flag state, basis which they will have to evaluate that after the determined time. And the last thing that I would like to mention is solution often used for improving the attained EEXI is the engine power limitation. However, some of the other technical measures such as energy saving devices, which are also used to improve the energy efficiency, would be the fitting of optimized bulbous bar, propeller boss cap fins, Now, for the propeller boss cap fins, it's typically an energy-saving device which is attached to the propeller of a vessel. It breaks up the hub vortex generated behind the rotating propeller, resulting in energy saving, which is approximately 3 to 5% compared to an identical, regular propeller. It can be installed on CPP or even on a fixed pitch propeller. The optimization of the bulbous bow would typically be designed for the high speed and the loading conditions. But now they're also looking at the design conditions where it can be incorporating a huge bandwidth to accommodate and such that it may not give you the best result at the highest operating speed and the loading condition, but also for a various other range of operating conditions. And air lubrication system would basically be injecting air bubble to be able to reduce the friction between the ship's hull and the seawater. So these are the measures that the industry would be looking at. Schematic layout. Please. CII, again, this it's an operational measure and the industry has to see that the attained is always less than the required. And coming to my final slide, the carbon intensity indicator. This is to assign a ranking label from among the 5 grades. As Mr. Ajay Chatterjee had already stated, A, B, C, D would be the criteria based on the attained annual operational CII. This is the graph wherein they have E, D, C, B, A. And if consecutively for 2 hours, if a ship is in D or 3E, then they would have to submit proposals to the flag state to identify the measures as to how the same can be controlled and improvised. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Based on these regulations, the conventional propeller designs and fuels may not be adequate to meet the ambitious goals of IMO. So deliberations are still ongoing between the various flag states, industry leader and the IMO as to how best the goal of a carbon-free environment can be achieved. That's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sonali. A very thorough and clear presentation. The future for the marine engineers is to be driven by the regulations and the industry requirements, So there's a lot to be learned and a lot to be done. There is one question, what is the full form of EEXI? Sonali, if you could just in the chat maybe type that for the benefit of everybody as to what is the full form of EEXI.
I will also describe what EEDI and
yeah, just
I would
put in the chat and and I saw one hand being raised of Mr. Rai, but maybe because we are short of time now. So in the end, I'm sure Admiral Nadkarni will give us some time to revisit some of these questions which are there. So with these words, once again, I thank IMF for giving me the opportunity to moderate the session, and compliments to the 2 excellent presenters, Commander Basha as well as Sonali Banerjee. Okay, back to you, Admiral Nadkarni.
Thank you very much, sir. Indeed, it was a very interesting session with Commander Basha giving the naval aspects of marine propulsion which exist in warships, and Ms. Banerjee giving the merchant navy aspects of those same systems which are there. I think there are no questions. So in that case, we will have our small little presentation ceremony. I will just take a minute to just.
Yeah, I'm happy that the presenters made it possible that we finish almost in time. So,
yes. Very well done indeed, sir. And Dr. Saxena, how can we thank you? We actually miss you, Dr. Saxena, at our functions. But then to say the same thing, we've not had any functions for the last.
Yeah, that's it. Otherwise, I've always been there for you.
How it has been. Otherwise, this would have been a physical seminar, and we would have had all of you and sumptuous lunch waiting for us at the Central Park Hotel. I hope we'll be able to do it next year for all of us again once.
I'm missing Commodore Veer, actually, I thought he would be here, you know.
He's there, sir. He's there.
Is
He's
there?
watching. Yes, he's silently watching.
He's silent. Okay, my regards and respect to him, sir.
Surely, sir. And I hope you got the memento, so this which has been sent to you.
Thank you so much. So nice
Thank
to
you very much, sir.
IMF memento.
Yeah.
Preserve it. Yes. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
And Commander Basha, your memento is with Lieutenant Commander Solanki. There he's
Yes,
raising it. You can see it.
Thank you very much, sir, for the momentum.
And thank you very much, Commander Basha, for an excellent presentation. On behalf of the IMF and NMF, thank you. And Sonali Banerjee, I mean, we learned lots today for the regulations, especially, and how the regulation is going to conflict with, you know, the requirements of the builders and the ship owners, etc. So this is a thing ongoing, and very glad that you've added to it. And on behalf of the IMF and NMF, thank you very much. And I hope you got your memento with you.
Yes, sir. I have the memento, and thank you so much. And I would cherish this forever, that my session with IMF. And
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much
much.
for sparing your time being with us. Thank you. And it's over to Admiral Nadkarni. I think you can announce the lunch break now.
Yes, sir.
Well deserved.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. And indeed, I think it's been a very interesting morning. We had a lot of excellent presentations. And though there are some questions, but I think probably because of the overshooting of the time, actually we could not have those questions answered during the session itself. So if I may suggest, perhaps after session 3, if there is some time, we could extend the question and answer. And those people who have some questions, maybe if you know, the speakers or the moderator can take them on, then I think that should be fine with everyone. So.
Also, if some of the questions can be answered in the chat box itself, you know, that will be a great thing.
Yes, then it will. I think it's the only thing it should be then you know, directed at everyone so that everyone understands the answer for
Yes.
that. Yes. So with that, then we will have a break for lunch, sir. And since now the time is about 13:12, 1:12, so may I suggest that we again reassemble here at about 1410, if that is okay with everyone, 1 hour for lunch.
14:10 is fine, absolutely.
Yes, fine.
Then we will start again this session at about 1410, and that will be Captain Subedar with the post-lunch openers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing all of you all after lunch. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
thank you so much.